To bring the August 6th Energy and Environment Committee to order. 3 members are present, and if it's okay with my colleagues, I'd like to move items 4, 5, and 6 on consent, unless there's an objection. Mr. Kretz?
I think that's fine.
Mr. Blumenfield? Very good. Those items will be moved on consent. So that brings item 1. Why don't we go ahead and take public comment first? Hopefully it'll inform the conversation. I would remind the audience that we will be taking items 1, 2, and 3 and general public comment. So if you wish to speak, please see the clerk here and fill out a card so that we can make sure that we get your comments on the record. With that, I have 1 card.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I made an error. I'd like to ask if we could also hear item 5.
Okay, very good. So we will move items 4 and 6 on consent, and we will take up item 5. But first, we will go with item 1. Liz Crossan. You're the only speaker on item 1.
Good afternoon. My name is Liz Crossan. I'm the Executive Director of Los Angeles Waterkeeper. We're a local environmental organization that addresses water quality and water supply issues throughout Los Angeles County. I'm here today just to make a brief comment and to hopefully urge you to take some proactive steps to require DWP to implement a robust maintenance, inspection, rehabilitation, and replacement program for its water infrastructure. And just as a point of comparison, if you're not aware, LA Waterkeeper, formerly Santa Monica Baykeeper, sued a different department under the City of LA Sanitation, over 10 years ago, and entered into a consent decree. That was with regards to sewage spill overflows from the sewage pipe system, which is nearly 7,000 miles long. My understanding it's of a similar size as the water distribution system. Under that 10-year consent decree that we came to, we actually had a very detailed inspection, replacement, maintenance program, whereas the LA Sanitation Department had to replace so many miles of pipe, had to inspect using CCTVs so many hundred miles of pipe every year, and it was a very strict schedule, and we'd like to see something like that for the Department of Water and Power as well. Hopefully you don't need a consent decree to actually make that happen, so I'd like to see that happen without a lawsuit, and I would urge you to require them to do that, and I think that it's especially important when we are in the middle of a drought and considering what it looks like to our residents when we have highway signs that say, save water, and then they see pictures of, cars floating in UCLA in 20 million gallons. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here.
Tracy Quinn with NRDC.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Tracy Quinn. I'm a policy analyst and civil engineer with the Natural Resources Defense Council. We appreciate Councilmember Kretz's leadership on this issue of addressing water main breaks and water loss, especially during this historic drought. The motion before the committee today is a good first step, but we have some recommended amendments. All members of the California Urban Water Conservation Council, including LADWP, are supposed to be implementing a set of best management practices on water loss. These are referred to as BMP 1.2. And one of the requirements of BMP 1.2 is for each water supplier to maintain records of all reported main breaks and repairs, including damages. So NRDC recommends that the motion include a request to LADWP to provide records of all reported leaks from July 1st, 2013 through June 30th, 2014, including the time of the reported leak, the leak location, type of leaking pipe segment or fitting, leak runtime from report to repair, estimated leakage volume from report to repair, and the cost of the repair, including pavement restoration costs and paid out damage claims, if any. This data should already be available in work orders from LADWP crews who work to repair the breaks and should not only be reported to the City Council, but should be publicly available via a website database. We have provided text of recommended changes to Councilmember Kretz's staff for those of you that would like to review it. The unfortunate truth is that main breaks happen all the time, and all the main breaks put together, including the big breaks like the one that we saw on Sunset on July 29th, are only a fraction of the total amount of water that is lost from our water distribution system each year. The great majority of drinking water is lost due to leaks, and if the city wants to ensure locally reliable and sustainable water for all Angelenos, we need to do more to address water loss in the city, both main breaks and leaks. With the right planning, a significant portion of water leaks in the city can be cost-effectively targeted and repaired, and this is something that we would like to work with you on. Thanks again for the time to speak.
Very good, thank you. Seeing that there are no additional cards for public comment, we will go ahead and close public comment. I'd invite the Department of Water and Power to come on up and speak to Mr. Koretz's motion. And I see that we have our General Manager here. Welcome, Ms. Edwards. I know that a lot of this was talked about at the board meeting, and for those of us who were sort of paying attention, I think it's helpful to repeat it again because I think this is all incredibly important. So with that, please begin.
Thank you, sir.
If you could pull up the mic a little bit so this way we can get you.
My name is Marcy Edwards with your Department of Water and Power. Tuesday the 29th, it was quite an exciting day for us, as we're all well aware. About 3:25 in the afternoon, we saw a spike on our charts and the rupture was reported. Today, I brought with me Jim McDaniels, who's our Assistant General Manager of Water and Power. Jim has a presentation that will go over things like the main replacements, types of leaks, the replacement strategies, pipeline technology. So what I really wanted to touch on briefly at the beginning is I want to state and acknowledge to you the actions of city personnel in response to this leak were superlative. Staff responded immediately. They stayed on the job 24 hours a day until it was done. The nice part is I know you know that because many of you, including Councilmember Koretz, were on site. They coordinated very well, all the city groups, Bureau Engineering, Street Services, DWP, LAPD. It was a tremendous effort to return a rupture of that magnitude to service in that short a time. So before we get into all of the things that remain a level of challenge for us, I wanted to go on record as I felt that the response was of a high caliber from our city folk. And we did this with all city personnel. With that, I'd like Jim to go ahead and start his presentation on the trunk line break.
Okay. Jim McDaniel, Senior Assistant General Manager in charge of the water system for LA Water and Power. So the break location was in the 10,600 block of West Sunset Boulevard, just north of UCLA, between Hillgard and Veteran. It was immediately across the street from Marymount High School, which is on the other side of Sunset from UCLA. This was a picture that many people saw on television last Tuesday afternoon. At approximately 3:25, the call came into our customer center and identified by water control as a spike in the outflow from the Upper Stone Canyon Reservoir. After normal shift, many of our crews were headed home at that time. It's just about quitting time, end of shift. But the crews were called on the radio and they responded, and we called others out to respond to what was obviously a large and major situation. The break occurred at a juncture in our water system where three different pipes of different ages come together, moving water under very high pressure over 200 psi from Stone Canyon Reservoir to smaller pipes that serve our customers on the west side of Los Angeles. The area was secured by traffic and rerouted by LA Fire Department and LA Police Department. After normal shift evening break, leak personnel responded. Others were called in to assist. One thing I wanted to point out that I guess it was widely reported that there was a DWP truck that drove up to the site. One of our workers got out, took a look at it, and then they got in his truck and drove off, and it was perceived that the department had kind of run away from the incident. I just wanted to clarify that what was going on there was one of our people had to physically identify where the site is because there are many valves in there, and it's really hard to tell exactly until you look at it. There are no valves in the immediate vicinity that are of any use in turning it off, but you have to know where the break occurs. So he observed that, reported that back on the radio, got in his truck, and then headed off to one of those valves to begin the shut-off process. So that's what was happening with that little piece of data. This failure occurred on what's called a Y branch. It's a Y branch because it's in the shape of the letter Y. and it's where a 30-inch riveted pipe from 1921 connected up to a steel 36-inch welded pipe from 1931, and then they were further connected to a downstream 36-inch pipe dating from 1958. So you've got 3 different pipes, 3 different ages. The 30-inch line had no prior leaks and was not scheduled for any sort of replacement. The 36-inch line had 5 prior leaks over the last 10 years, but it also was not a target for immediate replacement based on the criteria that we'd had at the time. On the picture, you note there's a large square cutout on the top of the pipe. That was done by our forces to facilitate getting into the pipe to make the repair. So this is an approximate time frame that we had for the response. Our initial call came in at 3:23. Our trouble board dispatched staff at 3.
Jump to the bottom.
Oh, at 3 at
They
3
don't need all the time.
at 3:27. Well, there's a couple of key points. One of our key milestones was getting the water off to stop the flooding. It took until 7:15 to make the shut off so that the water was under control. It did take another full day to get a total shut off so that we could begin repairs. So repairs were begun on Thursday the 31st, and we went through the various steps, and we had the facility open for traffic on 1:30 a.m. Monday morning, so we were ready for the Monday morning rush hour. The controlling the water flow was an issue. There was a lot of comments about how long it took to shut down the flow. One of the things we have to do when we have flows this large is it's not just one valve. There's a number of valves that have to be shut. They have to be shut in a very slow and deliberate manner, and they have to be done in a certain order. So, and you do this so that you protect the system, because the last thing we want is if you shut down the valves too quickly, it'll cause a hammer in the system and it could cause a major pipe explosion someplace else. So the closest valves are used to minimize the service area disruption. We were able to complete this without major loss of water. There were a few customers in the high areas in the upper reaches of the Santa Monica Mountains that had momentary loss of water pressure, but for the most part, West LA was spared any kind of prolonged water outage.
Just to put that into perspective, these valves, the large ones, have roughly 250 turns on them to reach closure. There were times we couldn't go any faster than 2 turns a minute in order to maintain pressure in the balance of the system. So it's a substantial task to get these things closed. Plus, most of them are of the age and technology of the pipe they serve.
Yeah, good point.
And my recollection from what I was told at the time was that we got somewhere around 230 turns and then it froze. So even though the water was no longer a danger to us, we were still losing a relatively modest amount of water.
We got down to around 230, and the pressure of the water against the internal mechanism of the valve caused it to freeze. And so over the next number of hours, they adjusted pressures on both sides in a way that they could achieve full closure. That's what took us longer.
Yeah. We ended up having to operate 13 different valves, kind of marching out progressively from the epicenter in order to relieve and repressure, and then we were able to get those last 20 turns on the valve that you mentioned, Councilman Koretz. We did this all in cooperation with our regulator, which is the Division of Drinking Water, formerly California Department of Public Health. They're very interested whenever you have a major break like this, and there's a sampling protocol. We were doing water sampling throughout this to make sure that there was no contamination of the water supply. So this particular slide shows the magnitude of the work. Each piece required multiple layers of welding to both inside and outside of the pipe. A lot of people asked me about comparing this to the Coldwater break 5 years ago, and actually the Coldwater, we were able to go in there and repair that pipe. It basically blew out the top of the pipe, and we were able to put a patch, if you will, over it. In this particular instance, we had to reconstruct this whole Y branch intersection. So it wasn't a repair, it was really a reconstruction, which is a whole different level of complexity. This just shows you that our welders were able to fabricate the necessary pieces. We had to fabricate a T-piece and an elbow piece. They did this all from straight pieces of pipe, cutting them up and fabricating the necessary pieces on site. The straight sections were connected back to the existing pipe with flanges to accommodate 2 new valves that we put, 2 modern butterfly valves, which have better performance than some of these old gate valves that we were talking about. So we took this opportunity, and we had some valves available, so we installed 2 new valves in the process. This just shows the welders. They were working around the clock. As you recall, the weather was pretty hot, humid, not real great conditions to be wearing heavy welding gear, and these guys worked just around the clock to get this thing accomplished. So one of the things that we want to do is protectively coat the pipe, so we had to pour concrete thrust blocks behind these elbows and T's, and so we wrapped all the pipe to make sure that there was no corrosion between the concrete and the pipe material itself, to make sure that we don't have any kind of a failure on our repair going forward. Then we did a complete compaction of the backfill, which is very important on a street such as Sunset, which has heavy bus and truck traffic. The firm base that we were overseen by the Department of Public Works and Bureau of Street Services to make sure that this was reconstructed to the highest standards possible. We did have some meetings where all the different managers and engineers got together to figure out how to do this in a manner and meet the schedule, because there's some ways to do this using slurry, which is kind of a weak concrete, but that would have taken multiple days to cure. So we came up with a way of doing this so we could get the necessary compaction, make sure it's a safe job, but get it done days sooner than we would have under kind of traditional construction practices. Then on Sunday afternoon, we were able to turn the site over to the Bureau of Street Services, which did all the paving with their own crews, and the paving had to be done in several lifts. And at midnight, we were able to get the road striped, and it was turned over and open for traffic at about 1:30 in the morning on Monday morning. It does take a team to do this sort of a repair. From the water and power side, we had over 250 employees that were involved at various times on this project. On site at the peak, we had over 100 people working at the same time at the site, and that's just DWP. There were dozens of other people, contract administration, Bureau of Sanitation, police, fire, council offices, DOT, contract administration, and all this was done with no injuries on the site. We got this whole job done, nobody got hurt, and there were no injuries from our customers and our citizens either. So this picture shows the DWP command post trailer that was out there, and this is the incident command staff along with the mayor's office, public works commissioners, executive managers from the various departments. So into the cause of this. This is a picture that shows a piece of the cutout section. We have quite a bit of extensive corrosion on this. The existing 36-inch line that was installed in 1931 was connected to by this Y to this 1921 piece pipe. We observed deep exterior pitting with a little effort. You could almost scrape the corrosion away and kind of rub a hole through the pipe. It was so corroded. We did observe some through holes, so that was probably this pipe had probably been leaking for a while. We did see in the Y branch piece itself there was some what we would consider by today's standards substandard welding practices. Some of it we speculate was because it was such an unusual configuration, the welders probably couldn't get inside the pipe to do the weld the way we would have done it now, and so there were some unusual welds there that probably also contributed to the failure of this piece. On our mainline replacement program, we have been replacing mainline for a while. We actually started on mainline with a cement mortar lining program that started back in the 1940s, but in the more modern incarnation of this was in the 1970s through 1998. We spent approximately $400 million, and we lined 14 million feet of pipe in this process. And what this is in the old days, they wouldn't have any kind of lining on the pipe. It would just be bare metal on the inside, and you get terrible corrosion going on. So we sprayed a cement mortar lining coating on the inside of the pipe, and it was estimated that this would add 30 to 50 years of life to the pipe. In 2006, we started our mainline replacement program, and since then we've replaced about 145 miles of main. In 2006-07, approximately 60,000 feet were replaced, and we've incrementally increased that to about 150,000 feet, which is our goal for this current year. Our replacement rate in 13-14 was worked out to an equivalent of about a 315-year replacement cycle, where our goal is to reduce that and get that down to about a 250-year replacement cycle with the funding that we have available to us right now.
Jim, help me understand what's on the y-axis there. So then you've got numbers, what are those categories there? I know the years, but...
Yeah, so what we've got is on the right-hand axis is the number of miles of pipe, and those correspond to the little numbers in the bottom of the bars. And on the left-hand side, it's the annual number of water main breaks, and that goes with the left axis. So
when you say breaks, is that is that the same as leaks? So in 2006, you had 1,700 breaks or leaks.
Correct.
Okay, and you had 10 miles, miles or feet.
Those are in miles.
There, yeah. Miles of replacement done. Okay.
Yeah, and it's those are cumulative. So we're showing you the cumulative amount. It's not each year's amount.
Got it.
And so the 250-year replacement cycle would correspond to what our goal is for this current year. Let me cover that in a little bit here. As far as leak rate is concerned, back in 2009, after the Coldwater break, our commission had us commissioned a major study. An expert panel was called in to review the series or the rate at which our pipes were breaking and how did we stack up compared to the rest of the country. What they found at that time was that there was an industry average leak rate of about 27 leaks per 100 miles per year. That's kind of the benchmark. Our rate at that time was about 20 breaks per 100 miles per year, so we were below the national average. The good news is we've since reduced that significantly. We're down to about 15 leaks per 100 miles per year currently. So we're headed in the right direction. We're replacing pipe and we're headed in the right direction. But obviously we still have these major incidents, and it's going to call for even more replacement going forward.
Jim, I heard a statement earlier as far as the amount of general leakage in our system was extremely high. How does that compare with the rest of the nation?
So we also, as the speaker mentioned, we're members of the California Urban Water Conservation Council. We're firm believers in the best management practices that she referred to, BMP 1.2, which calls for monitoring water losses. So we recently conducted a very thorough, what they call water loss audit and component analysis, where you go in and not only look at how much water is going in versus how much is coming out, but you break it out and determine where are all the pieces, where's the difference coming from. And some of it's metering inaccuracies, and then there's what they call real losses, which would be leaks and evaporation. Our real losses are at 3.5%, which the consultant that did this study called the best performance they've seen in the western United States, and the western states traditionally do much better than the eastern states. So I would argue that we have one of the tightest, best performing systems in the country. That being said, there's more that can be done. I'm not saying that's the be-all and the end-all, but there are utilities in the East Coast that lose as much as 30% of their water through leakage, and we're at a tenth of that. So,
and that study covered sort of what time period? I mean, it was...
It used the methodology that they used picked a year, and I think ours was based on the year 2012, because you have to have a begin date and an end date, and what comes in and what goes out. Okay. Just our investments in pipeline. Pipelines are a large part of our investments, but it's not our entire infrastructure program. New and replacement water system facilities, including the Los Angeles Aqueduct Pumping the Los Angeles Aqueduct, pumping stations, pressure regulating stations, dams and reservoirs and tanks and pipelines. They are all part of this. So we have about 7,200 miles of pipe total, and about 240 miles of that are older than 100 years old right now. Our trunk lines, which we call are the larger diameter lines, larger than 24 inches in diameter, account for about 575 miles of that 7,200 miles, and so that's about 8% of our pipe is these large diameter. 92% are the smaller diameter. One of the things that we've been able to do to address some of this trunk line issue is we've had to replace a number of trunk lines in conjunction with our water quality improvement projects. The city trunk line, for instance, which was the cause of the Coldwater break, was the Coldwater break was part of the city trunk line, and we're in the process of replacing that entire line that runs from Franklin Canyon Reservoir in the Santa Monica Mountains all the way up to Sylmar. So it cuts across the entire valley. It's a
on that point, I know that we've been notifying my district that you're doing the trunk line repair. It's going to take, I don't want to say, I think it was 5 years, Foothill Boulevard along all of from Sylmar all the way to Lakeview Terrace. That's the same line that you're talking about.
Actually, that's the Foothill trunk line. That's a different one, yeah.
All right.
And so that's also one that needs to be replaced. But as part of doing water and by enabling us to do these trunk line replacements as part of a water quality project, we have access to the state revolving funds money that are coming through that the federal government gives to the state, and then we've tapped into that.
I know that we're going to get to sort of the order of what is being replaced, but since we're in Sylmar for a second here on Foothill Boulevard, is that trunk line replacement project a result of the grade of that particular line because it's a D or an F, or is it more because you say that there's an opportunity to leverage sort of funds? I mean, you don't have. I know you'll probably have to figure it out because it's a specific line, but I'm just sort of wondering out loud now how it is that we're queuing all of this, because I think that you'll see in short order, what it is that we're doing and why is going to be really, I think, a highlight of at least one of the recommendations that I'd like to see come out. But it was more curiosity to know if you all knew why Foothill Boulevard is.
This is Marty Adams. That line is a combination of age and capacity. Part of the line was replaced back when the filter plant was built in 1985-86. It went from a 30-inch to a 60-inch, and then part of that was never done. So there were several phases, and we only did the first few phases at the time. So there's some system needs that require the bigger pipe as well as the age of it.
So I just wanted to mention that because people have asked, is there any kind of money coming in to deal with this other than ratepayer money? Because most of it has to be ratepayer money, but on these state revolving funds, we've tapped into over $840 million of low interest and no interest loans that we've been able to get. We've also gotten $45 million in grants from ARRA grants, and another $14 million in Safe Drinking Water Revolving Fund outright grants to help us fund these projects. So we have been aggressively pursuing outside sources of funds to help ease some of the burden on the ratepayer. And the numbers in this slide, I want to point out, those are capital costs only, because there have been some other numbers that have been out there that include operation and maintenance costs. These are purely capital costs. So the pipeline replacement strategy, we use a number of factors when we're deciding on how to score things for candidates for replacement. The leak rate, the damage potential, the operational criticality. In other words, who would get put out of water if this thing fails? Is a major hospital going to be out? The leak history, pressure, corrosion environment. Age does play a part into it, but it's not actually one of the top 5 factors. And then we also try to coordinate our replacement schedule with street services, so we're not tearing up a street that's just been paved. We did have a trunk line testing program that was designed to bridge the gap between a mandate to accelerate our trunk line replacement rate and focusing our limited resources. Trunk lines are very expensive to replace, and they're also disruptive to the community, as you've seen, or driving around the valley. They're major construction projects. And one of the things we've tried to do is by testing them, basically doing pressure tests in the field where we would isolate a section of trunk line, pump it up to a pressure that's above the normal working pressure, but still within, it should still be within the material handling capacity of the pipe, and kind of force a failure under a controlled condition. We monitor the pipe for the pressure. If the pressure starts dropping, you know it's leaking somewhere. You find the leak, repair the leak, and then hopefully you've taken care of kind of the weakest links in the chain and you've bought yourself some time rather than digging up miles and miles of pipe that may be in perfectly good condition. Try to just deal with the pieces.
You know, on that point, help me understand how you do that, because you're dealing with pipe that's buried. This pipe, for example, had these pinhole sort of, it was leaking. And so presumably it would be able to withstand some increased pressure given sort of the throughput because of its size. How do you sort of pinpoint where it is that, how do you perfect that assessment? Because it seems to me that's part of the challenge. I noticed in some of the report here that there was a sonic way of doing this sort of thing that wasn't terribly accurate. I mean, what is sort of the latest, greatest sort of technologies to be able to do these assessments so that you can get closer to where we need?
Our last slide.
What's that?
You leaped to our last slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll be quiet.
Almost
because I think I've,
You're the chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Labange. I am the chairman.
The takeaway in this in particular is that these trunk line ruptures can be spectacular, but even the pipes that are of 100 years in age are surprisingly in good shape over much of their length. And so we need to continue to move forward with these testing technologies on an incremental basis so that we're not just, and as Jim pointed out, you stop the flow and then you add water in, and if you still see water, you know it's leaking in that segment. That's more the way to find it. But we are looking at some other stuff, and we'll talk about that in just a second.
Right. And so, yeah, she answered your question. So let me, real quick, what are we doing as far as going forward? In the rate increase that we'd gotten previously, we'd built in funding to increase our mainline replacement rate up to the levels that you see here at about 155,000 feet per year. That takes us to about a 250-year replacement cycle, so that's what we're shooting for this year. What we would like to do is going forward, and we would probably be bringing something that would include something to get us up to something like a 170-year cycle. If the will of the council is to approve additional funding, we would be prepared to even better that, but that was what we felt was a kind of a reasonable amount to get us there now. One of the areas, though, that they think Marty and I have been talking about is we need to address these trunk lines, like the ones that just failed here. They're difficult, they're big construction projects, they're very expensive, but we need to have a systematic way of evaluating them and replacing them. And so we will probably be needing to come back to the council with some sort of recommendations for dealing with that piece, that part of the infrastructure going forward. So
I would make a brief observation. Planning for this type of retrofit has to take a lot of other issues into consideration. As an example, it shouldn't be the solitary goal to move from a 300-year replacement cycle to a 100-year replacement cycle, because we'll dig up 2/3 of the street in Los Angeles to do that. So trying to stack these and work them in a way that we manage the impact on the consumers, slowly raise up our replacement rate is really the sanest way to go.
So as far as new technologies are going, we continuously monitor the state of the industry regarding testing techniques. We were members of the Water Research Foundation and a number of consortiums that take like venture capital type ideas and give them a real world testing and see whether there's a good viability to them. Unfortunately, there's no magic device that you can just run through the pipe and it would tell you where all the weak spots are, if it's a good pipe or a bad pipe. That really doesn't exist today. One of the things that's interesting is that when we went through and cement mortar lined all the pipe, if you run a camera through our pipes, they look really good on the inside because they've got cement mortar lining on them. But what you find is when a break, like in this case, a lot of the corrosion's on the outside of the pipe, and you really can't see that. So and the difference there is our pipes are under tremendous amounts of pressure, where sewer pipes are unpressurized. So usually the kind of breaks you get are different, and you'll see a crack in a sewer pipe with a camera. You don't see that on a pressurized water pipe normally. There are some audible techniques that are used. We do sound leaks, but you kind of have to know that there's something going on in the area, and then you use the audible technology to pinpoint in on it and find out where it is. This pressure testing thing that we were doing was actually one of the more promising things that we tried. It sounds a little brute force, but it was actually fairly effective. One of the problems is you have to isolate a long stretch of pipe. You have to figure out how are you going to serve the customers that are normally served by that while you're doing this, which can take several days. And there's street excavations and other things that need to be done. So it's not without some sort of operational impacts. Some of the other things we're looking at are corrosion protection, including advanced coatings and impressed current to try to reduce the amount of corrosion going forward on pipe. We've also started using plastic pipe. We traditionally had not used plastic pipe. We found that in certain applications, especially in lower pressure situations and high corrosivity, we see this over in like the Marina Del Rey area, that plastic turns out to be a very good option, and we're starting to use that in those kind of locations. And then we've also started using this pipe that came out of the earthquakes in Japan. That's a ductile iron pipe with these earthquake lock fittings, and we've started using that on selective locations. What we're trying to do is stimulate the market. Hopefully we find a domestic manufacturer for that, because we don't have to be buying our pipe from Japan. But those are some of the technologies. So we are chasing some of these technologies in order to address this situation. And I think that was the end of my slides.
Very good. Well, I do have a significant amount of questions here. Let me just sort of ask I think what's really sort of obvious and necessary. What did this mean for our ratepayers, both sort of in the vicinity of the rupture of the pipe and sort of globally? What is it that it meant to them? And I think in the immediate area, it's important for us to understand. I think we had, for better or for worse, significant coverage, which I think helped people understand what it was that was happening. But how do we, as a matter of practice, let people know that we have an incident like this? And what is it that the department did for this particular situation?
You want to?
No, go ahead.
Start? Okay. In the area of the impacts on the immediate customers, are you talking in terms of damages or cost of repair or something?
Yes.
Okay.
Sort of like interruption in terms of the residents that were up there. It's my understanding that there was little to no interruption.
Right.
And how did we let folks know that we had this major incident, that were immediately sort of affected in the area? And then in terms of the ratepayers, what does it mean in terms of losses?
Right.
I mean, what is this going to cost the ratepayer sort of overall? And it's not. It's important to highlight this particular incident, but I think, sort of going forward, I think this was fairly extreme in that there was significant damage that I don't think any of us could have predicted. But what did this cost the ratepayer?
Yeah. So in terms of repairs, we haven't added up all the costs yet. As General Manager said, we did do this with all city forces, so I think we maximized the amount of resources that we had available to us, which I think is going to help keep the costs down going forward. Ultimately, the department will be responsible for paying and reimbursing other city departments for the cost. We lost about 20 million gallons of water in this incident. That works out to about 60 acre feet, so it's probably around $50,000 worth of water. We have a multi-$100 billion, like $300 million budget for purchased water. So
To put that into perspective, yeah. LA is using between 500 and 600 million gallons a day. Sorry.
That's all right.
Go ahead.
So we lost 20 million gallons. The city of Los Angeles uses about 600 million gallons per day. What does that work out to be? About
4%. 4%
of
1 day
of our daily consumption as the city of Los Angeles was lost still not a drop in the bucket, but sort of in the grand scheme of things, on a yearly basis, it was not that much water, albeit we can't afford to waste any drops of water. So it costs the ratepayer physically about $50,000 because of the acre foot that we lost. But in terms of impacts potentially, the claims that we're expecting to come down the road, understanding there's a process, the damages in terms of what we may be responsible for, understanding that that process is still sort of working itself out, is in the tens of millions.
If I could speak to that, sir. This is Eskel Solomon of the City Attorney's Office, and I'd like him to address that question.
DWP is unique in that they have a excess insurance policy for incidents like this. The policy is incident-based so that the July 29th occurrence in its totality is a covered matter. We have corresponded. I have given the necessary notices to our excess carrier. The department has a self-insured retention after which we believe we will have coverage. There are still issues of coverage, but we believe that by and large we will have that coverage up to $100 million.
That's
Our deductible, so to speak, is, I think, around $3 million.
We have a $3 million self-insured retention and then a $100 million plateau thereafter.
well, the management, the leaders of the utility currently and then should really be applauded, because we have figured out how to protect as best we can the ratepayer. It sounds like equally important, the folks that were damaged in this incident will be made whole, and we've covered the ratepayer. At some point, understanding that there's a process, there's going to be final dollar figures, I think that's something that we would like the committee to report on, notwithstanding the fact that we've got a good premium. It's important for us to sort of understand the totality of the damage. I want to let Mr. Koretz in because this is the district that he represents, but there's something that I wanted to sort of ask you all is how is it that the utility currently and prospectively as a result of this incident define leaks? Because to me, this is sort of an interesting situation. One, it's hard to sort of find where they are, but there's, I'm assuming that in the 7,200 miles of pipe that we have, they're leaky. You know, it's just not sort of a measurable leak, and certainly not something where you'll see a drop in pressure to alert your forces to go out and sort of deal with it. So how is it that we measure them? I mean, it seems to me that it's after the fact, but is there a way that we know sort of in real time how leaky the system is, and which begs the questions on how it is that we are going to establish the queue to go out there and try to narrow down the location. So how do we define the magnitude and the locations of leaks today?
So the way it works in practicality from a day-to-day basis is we have between 3 and 4 leaks a day in the city of LA. Most of them, since we live in a dry climate and we don't have a lot of rivers and streams running through here, they do tend to surface. Most of them, they become visible quickly and we can see them and repair them. That's not to say there aren't some that run for a while and we don't catch them. So for the latter, you do things like the water loss audit and component analysis. So when we went through that, as I mentioned, we had an extremely low actual loss number, where basically you do a mass balance. You measure how much water is coming into the system, how much is coming out through the meters, and then the difference, you parse it out to all the different reasons why that would be. And it's a very thorough analysis, and it stands up to an audit type level of scrutiny. From that, we have recommendations from the consultant to then further go after leaks through some of these acoustic techniques and some of the other things that are going on out there. One of the things that we're looking at as we convert to automated meter reading, we will be having actual instruments, if you will, in the field in the form of our meters that you can piggyback a acoustic measuring device onto, and then that feeds information back, and then you can correlate it through computer algorithms to determine where likely leak areas are. That seems to be like one of the most promising technologies out there as we roll out automated meters. Most of our meters are not automated at this point. We have some that are like, I don't want you call them you drive by them and wave a wand at them, but they don't feed information back to a central computer. So you need to have that extra information gathering capacity to do that. So that's one thing that we're looking at out there that would help us even drive this number down further. But I think it was very heartening to me to see our number was so low to begin with. We don't have a huge problem, but we do want to stay on top of this, and we want to drive our losses down.
The analysis that you mentioned is really, I guess it makes an awful lot of sense. You know how much water is flowing through the system and how much is actually being sort of read in the meters,
right.
And then you figure out how to pinpoint. How often do we do that analysis? Is that something that's done on a monthly, quarterly basis?
We
Because it
did
seems
this
like it's...
one in 2012. It takes a whole year's data. We will probably do another one next year, just so that we can measure the delta. If it's significant, we'll do it with greater frequency.
And I will let Mr. Koretz jump in here in a second. But so as we're doing sort of this analysis, I mean, it seems to me that if money was no object and we had sort of the resources available, there must be some sort of latest, greatest BMPs out there that would help facilitate this sort of pinpointing. Because I think what is inaccurate is to say that age alone is a factor, like anything else, on these pipes. And so it's sort of where they're located, the geography associated with it, the mechanisms by which the pipes were in, the techniques at the time, all that sort of thing. So is there sort of a wish list, if you will, that the department has sort of, or is beginning to think about in terms of what technologies are the latest, greatest that we can begin to sort of making the investment as the resources are available? Is that something that we would find in your IRP? Is that something that is a sort of a standalone conversation? It presumably is something that you all have been thinking about absent this situation.
Well, I mean, some of the tools that I've talked about are things that I'd like to see. There's another tool out there from a vendor, an Israeli vendor, that also bases and it's a computer algorithmic thing based on pressures, but you have to have a whole network of pressure sensors out throughout the system on almost like grid type thing. We don't have that kind of instrumentation in our system. So those are some things that we're thinking about, but I really want to look at what's the return on the investment on something like that, because if it's just finding leaks and it's not really helping prevent explosive pipe failures, I'm not sure that there's a good business case for that, quite frankly, and there's other ways of dealing with that. I do have to say, Councilman, though, that based on our replacement rate where we're at right now, we just need to replace more pipe. We've already identified that's probably the first and foremost. Unfortunately, I don't think there's any. Yeah, there's no technological thing that's going to get us out of this. We're not investing as much as we need to do in infrastructure replacements. That's kind of the first thing. Once we get our replacement rate something closer to something that's realistic, then I think we start looking at fine-tuning it with some of these technological solutions.
And so the reason I ask is because, I mean, clearly we have to make ground on our sort of capital investment and sort of lower the schedule on deferred maintenance to something that's more reasonable. But I'm just wondering out loud that, you know, at the same time, if there were technologies that could be deployed, and if Street Services happens to be doing something somewhere, could they somehow be of assistance to start putting in these sort of pressure meters or whatever the technology is, so that we start chipping away at that sort of future warning system sooner than later? But we can talk more about that. I know Mr. Koretz has tons of burning questions. Mr. Koretz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd agree with the General Manager's assessment that this could not have been handled more professionally, and the fact that, you know, not only did we have a 100-foot spout of water, which is quite dangerous, if you actually went to the site, there were hundreds of giant chips of asphalt, some the size of us, and the fact that no one was injured, much less killed, was a minor miracle. Our first responders from the fire and police did an amazing job of getting in the garages, finding a few people that were in danger and making sure they were brought to safety. And DWP did a remarkable job of shutting this off in a judicious but quick way, so that nothing else blew. We were able to deal with the things that fate handed us, like the inability to turn the mechanism all the way to the end and find other valves. DWP did an amazing job of handcrafting the new pipe in a way that very few other cities have the capability to do. I saw our street services people do the asphalting and the striping in a way that was amazingly rapid. I thought the mayor's office did a great job of pushing everybody to move forward as quickly as possible, but not in a way that wasn't completely safe. And who would have believed that the street looks better than it did before the whole thing happened? So it's all been pretty remarkable. Now, the event itself, have we confirmed exactly what we think caused it? What were the elements of that, and did that cause us to learn anything that will change where we look in terms of our most immediate repairs as we go forward?
Unfortunately, I don't think we learned anything that was new. Yeah, that was new here. It was mainly due to corrosion, both internal and external corrosion on the pipe. We know that lining pipes helps extend their life. The part of the pipe where this thing failed, the lining had apparently ripped out over time and failed. So
Internal wrapping?
Yeah, lining our pipe is good. External wrapping on our pipes is good. We didn't have external wrapping on the parts where it failed. So these were things that we already know. Unfortunately, we just have a lot of this in a system. It's older, it was common practices in decades gone by.
Now, it blew where you have the Y connection. It blew on both sides, on both pipes. So is it partly the connection itself, and are there other connections like that we should be looking at replacing sooner rather than later?
If we have very good records on our pipe compared to most utilities. But one of the things that was interesting about this Y piece, that when we started looking at it, they apparently fabricated this thing out of pieces they had left over from another job, is what it looked like. They took a whole bunch of bands and welded them together, and so it was probably not the most, I'll call it, professional type installation. That level of detail is not in our records. If I had records, then I would know that, oh wow, I've got this thing that's kind of Rube Goldberg put together. We could target looking for those. I don't think we're going to find that.
I believe so, sir.
That was a little unusual that we found something that was so kind of cobbled together, but I would not have records like that to know where to find those things elsewhere.
Well, I'd tell you to fire the people that did that, but they'd probably be 130 years old now.
Yeah.
I think it's too late. I know when I took a trip to Israel in December, there were a lot of conversations about leak and break detection technology there. And you mentioned it in passing. Have we talked to everyone over there in that field to be sure that we know of all the latest technologies that have been developed there that might be applicable?
I've talked to a lot of them. I don't know that I can't say that I've talked to everyone. I was at the American Waterworks convention, which is the big annual convention, and a lot of the vendors were there with leak products, and I talked to several of them. Again, a lot of them, what I found is a lot of them require some sort of installation of some sort of sensing infrastructure that you need to make their systems work. I didn't see anything that was directly applicable to what we have in the in situ conditions that we have right now. But I'll continue to look, and we'll continue to talk to whoever has ideas, because I'm sure there's some good ideas.
There may be, in fact, case-by-case opportunities. To the extent that we have records of higher incidence of rupture with certain types of configuration or placement, then that may well be a good testing ground to put in that type of seismic system or sonic system rather to monitor it. So there may be more narrow applications. I think Jim is speaking more to the business case of trying to blanket the system with it isn't viable at this point.
And one of the pipes that was involved in this is what they call a riveted pipe, and riveted pipes were straight sections that they would, rivet together with like little pins that hold the pipes together as opposed to continuously welding them. And we know that riveted pipes are weaker than steel pipes, and we know that that they have a higher incidence of failure, and we've targeted them for replacement, and we're looking more closely at riveted pipe. Interestingly enough, on this case, we had a riveted pipe, an old riveted pipe next to a newer welded pipe, but it was the newer welded pipe that had the worst leak history and was actually the badder actor of the two. The riveted pipe actually was holding up pretty good considering its age. So it's not, even though you have some intuition that one's going to be worse than the other, it doesn't always work out that way.
And right after this happened, the Consul General of Israel gave me a call and said that they may have some of their experts visiting over the summer. So if that's the case, maybe we can connect everybody and
love that opportunity.
see if there's a more up-to-date conversation to be had about it. Do we know exactly how much water we lost? I know I've heard from 10 million to 20 million. Do we actually have an accurate way to track that?
We went back and looked at the numbers again. I think we'll hold by the 20 million figure. That looks to be about the best estimate that we can have. We do that through a combination of flow rates and changes in reservoir elevations and what we're pumping into the system, and so we think the 20 million gallon figure is accurate.
Very good. And there's also a company that contacted my office, which I mentioned to the general manager, called Baker Core. And I don't know anything about the company specifically, but one of the things they do is they rescue large volumes of water in this kind of circumstance, from what they told us. So they find a way to save it and divert it so it can be reused at a later time. Are we aware of that technology, and are we looking at whether we can try and pre-plan mobilization for the next such thing?
I was waiting for the contact information for this company because I'm interested in how they characterize large volume. I mean, it could be trucks, but we'd be filling up a truck in a second and a half. So,
right. I don't have any more detail, but I think we obviously should take a look at it.
Because for other smaller volume issues, it might be a very valid solution.
Okay, so my office will get that to you, to your staff. Do we know how much the area of the break was leaking before it happened? Was there anything that could have given us an indication?
There were two that were characterized in the report as dime-sized holes in the pipe, so I'm guessing there was some water coming out of there. We're still looking at right now why we didn't see, we would have thought that we would have seen water at the surface with something like that. So even though they were dime-sized by the time all this disruption happened, they may have been pencil lead sides, before, but they were probably through, so that means there was probably water coming out of that pipe. I know there's a storm drainage system in the area. Sometimes the water will flow along the pipe, get into the storm drain system, and not surface, and that may have been the case in this instance. We're still looking at that.
Okay, and the other major events we've had in the last 5 years, the cold water blowout, the sinkhole that swallowed the fire truck, all of which, by the way, happened in my district. Thank you.
Sorry about that, Councilman.
Did we learn anything from those that gave us any great insights to how to identify those problems beyond just this last one?
They've all been somewhat different in their own way. I think, I would say that even though we keep saying age is not the only thing, a lot of these, like the cold water and this one, they do involve older infrastructure. But interestingly enough, as I recall, the one that involved the fire truck was a relatively new piece of pipe that was failing for a different reason. There was a concentrated corrosion issue associated with that. So
yeah, I think that one was only like 30 years old.
Yeah. So it's hard to draw generalities, but we certainly do study these various things. We do look at the failure mechanisms. We look at the construction techniques that were used at the time. We try to learn as much as we can. I think one of the biggest things that we're advancing is our response. On the response side to this, I think we did a much better job responding this time than we did on the cold water. I think we work together as a city team much better, thanks to leadership from yourself getting out there right away, the mayor's office. I think we really came together. I was really amazed. It was really great to be part of a city family team that got together and got this thing back in service. So that's one of the things, the takeaways for me.
Yeah, that was actually quite amazing to watch, and something we're all very proud of, I think. To bring us down to a level that we'd probably be happy with, although probably difficult for all of our many decades of deferred maintenance, to bring us down to something like a 100-year cycle. I recall a discussion that would cost something like $4 billion. Ideally, that's probably where we'd really like to be. How could we get there?
Well, we need to make those strategies, too, consistent with what we physically can do as well as what we can reasonably dig up at the same time. You're aware, even now, we have logical and appropriate restrictions about working in a number of streets downtown because of rush hour. So I don't want to set a goal that makes assumptions about those realities that don't end up being not true. But if you take a slightly longer view, say the 20-year view, we could ostensibly get to a 100-year replacement cycle by 20 years without it being overly impactful.
I mean, I think that's obviously the goal. I think 10 years would be silly.
It's very
and it would probably, if nothing else, it would drive everybody crazy on our streets. But if we can find a way to 20 to 25 years without causing an endless, disastrous impact on our streets and without bankrupting our ratepayers, I think that would be a really good goal.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Kretz?
That is it.
Mr. Blumenfield?
Okay. And again, I want to join my colleagues in commending you in terms of the work to make it all happen. It really is. It's great to see the city coming together. Nobody likes to see a pipe like this explode. I'm getting a little lost in all the numbers. I mean, just in terms of the pipes, hearing, and sometimes I hear a lot of numbers and try to figure out how they all add up. 4,000 miles of pipe. We're at a 315-year replacement cycle. You want to get to 250 years is what we're going to shoot for. The chart shows we're getting about 20 miles a year, which says to me we're getting, that
We would move from roughly 300 to maybe 275, 250-year replacement cycle.
Which would add another 10 miles a year.
You're suffering a bit from our having to roll it up into broader numbers. So, there are different replacement cycles for mains versus trunks versus distribution lines. So we're more talking on aggregate. The vast majority at some point need to be replaced, and we need to be able to mitigate the rate impacts on customers. And we don't want to set a schedule where we're replacing trunk lines at such a rapid rate that we're potentially starving the repairs we need to do in mains and in the other part of the distribution system. So the plan we'll bring forward is basically going to be an integrated one that talks about what we need to do with the water system, when we need to do it, and importantly, how we would recommend funding it.
And no matter what you do, you're mitigating risk. I mean, this was, a 93-year-old pipe,
Yep.
So might not have been repaired by the time, even if we were on that 100-year cycle.
Right.
So I guess that's the interesting question is how you go about mitigating the risk and where you pick it out. So
We know the one clear strategy, it's very important for us to involve ourselves in the technology of leak detection and saving water, et cetera. But the one supportable strategy is we need to expedite replacing the infrastructure. I think Jim has a good plan in that he has a majority of it ranked. He understands the factors and the implications. It's not so much stacking them. It's finding a way to repair them that is not overly impactful in terms of the streets and in terms of the rates.
and as we change from the different rates from the 315 to the 270, how much does that cost us additionally? What's the marginal increase in terms of the cost?
That was what, a 1 point? Help me with the last rate increase.
So the last rate increase that we had was there was two 3.5 rate increases in 2007, 2008. Not all of that was for infrastructure, but the way our rates work is we have dedicated rate components for water quality, for local water supply, but we don't really have any kind of dedicated component for infrastructure replacement. So the only way we pay for infrastructure replacement is when we get a base rate increase. That was our last base rate increase. Part of those two 3.5% increases were used to get us from the 60,000 feet a year to the 150,000 feet per year. I don't have the exact breakout of how much of that it was, but you're looking at, probably something. I don't even.
Okay.
I don't have the breakdown on it, but that's those were fairly modest rate increases, and we were able to make quite a bit of progress with that. So we'll need to be thinking in those terms going forward.
When was the last base rate increase in water?
2007. Was it 7 and 8? I think.
Wait,
8 and 9. I'm sorry.
Right here.
2008 and 2009. It was a
That's
2-year.
when they were, Mr. Chair, members, that's when they were approved. The last one was 09,
Yeah.
2010. That took effect 2 years.
But
Base rate.
Base rate.
But I was just trying to, is there any way to correlate to say, okay, to do an extra 10 miles a year, it's going to cost, $100 million or something like that? Or is that,
We
maybe
will,
that's not a
we
useful
will
figure?
likely bring forward something along the lines. First of all, we're going to consider bringing forward a dedicated rate component to infrastructure, because I think it's critical that customers be able to marry the cost with the actual work and implications, so that the discussion about all the peripheral factors impacting rates goes away. Secondly, we'll probably request another $500 or $600 million for infrastructure, and I'm doing it on the back of an envelope at the moment because we have a long involved process when we talk about rates, as you're well aware.
Absolutely.
But I put that somewhere in the 2% per year bucket.
2%
Right.
rate.
2% rate increase per year for that. And that $500 million, Jim, would net us about what?
Oh,
It was on the infrastructure side.
for a one-time 500 million?
Yeah.
You would be able to do several 100,000 feet. I don't have the numbers right now.
See, it's important to remember when you get a rate increase, we borrow off that money, and that rate increase then funds the debt service on that 30-year borrowing. Because you can't put the entire rate implication of these massive capital programs on the current rate base.
Right.
It can't tolerate it. So once that rate increase is levied, and then that money stream is going to pay that debt service, that's what's happening with that rate increase forever. We can't do more with it the next year. It's been committed.
We bond it, yeah.
So for additional commitments, we again go to the market, we borrow 30-year money so we can spread the implications over the lifetime of the ratepayers who are all going to enjoy it, not just the current ones.
So Marty was just giving me a little rule of thumb. $100 million is something like about 150,000 feet of pipe. Very rule.
$100 million is about 150,000
feet.
feet of pipe.
Roughly, it's in the neighborhood.
And we're doing how much per year now?
About that level now on main line, and then plus we have trunk line projects that are separate identified projects.
And then the other, just a separate topic, but related to the claims. So for folks who've asked, what that process is, like filing insurance, what's the timeline on the claims for folks who are out there?
We actually have been very proactive. We work with UCLA Communications Group. We actually set up desks out on site. We have all the information available online. Typically, the process, if you're referencing people with vehicles, UCLA will be a different conversation. But most of them are going through their insurance, and then we'll deal with their insurance companies after the fact. I think we've handled all of the traffic that's been given to us thus far, and I think we've only had 16, 17 claims, but that's obviously going to grow over time.
Thank you.
Mr. Labange?
Okay, thank you very much. Sergeant, would you please move this? I want to see Marty Adams. He's the number one man in the number two position in water, so I want to make sure. So if you move that, so I want to see him.
Yeah, we're done with
Yeah,
it.
we're done with that.
we're done with
That's
that.
good. I'm Marty.
Yes, sir.
How are you? Thank you very much. The first thing I want to say is thank you, Joe Castruda and his team were tremendous out there. Crew 252 from Public Works, Street Services, the Valley Asphalt Plant, DOT throughout the region in trying to, an unusual situation that I feel for UCLA because the way their campus was constructed, that valley that is right there, nestled there, it was just like, I mean, it's like a Muhammad Ali punch, just right to the kisser, and you couldn't have been any better in the worst situation. But the big thing I want to say is we all talk about infrastructure. And the big thing I want to say, I was standing with you and your colleagues on Glendale Boulevard with a 45-inch trunk line for the river supply conduit, and we were marking the street out, and we had to go from Fletcher all the way to Glendale Boulevard. And the big thing I want to say, members, is traffic was backed up because we were in the street with vests on, is somebody rolled down their window and said, "Councilman, I want my neighborhood back." And I was proud that we were fixing it with the river supply conduit, the old pipe, 1902 reservoir, 1904. I was proud that President Obama sent money to fix the Fletcher Drive Bridge. And I was proud that the Bureau of Sanitation was fixing all the sewer lines in the neighborhood. This guy felt he was being inundated, but we were delivering infrastructure. So just as Ms. Edwards said, the fine general manager of the Department of Water and Power, we start doing this, they're going to be backing off. I got billions of dollars of infrastructure that I'm fighting for with the subway down Wilshire Boulevard, with the RSC, New Silver Lake Reservoir out at Headworks, all the way down the line. It has to be coordinated. So it has to be. I want to give you a proclamation to salute that you had something that lasted 90 years in the city of Los Angeles. But Paul wouldn't second it, so we couldn't do that. But I just wanted to say there's a blend to all this. There's a blend. There's a couple things that I wanted to make note to you. Joe Romalo, I want you to organize every newspaper weather, no, not newspaper, every TV weather person and radio weather person so that they become very knowledgeable of your system. And I want to see maps that they have that they can use graphics of your trunk system. Your trunk lines are your biggest, baddest lines with all that water, all that pressure. And also, I want to ask you, Jim, look back at the notes of what happened in 71 and in 94 in the earthquake. Did any trunk lines blow like that? I know we were out for power for 3 days, but we got it back. And the reason why we got it back is because we have a ring around the city of transmission that provides the power. DWP was there and will continue to be there. But I want to know about the trunk lines, where they are, because that's the most serious thing as we look at things, because all that pressure, it was very unbelievable. I also wanted to mention, too, that the PIOs, and is the mayor's office here? Anybody from the mayor's office? Mayor's office is here. Organize all the PIOs. I really felt in the beginning of the event, the fire department was there on scene, and I know it takes them less time because of how they move across the city. In an event like this, we should have a joint tactical alert, this major, and get police escorts to you. Figure out how you can communicate with the police department to get your crews in. And I know the most important work was being done punching the buttons to try to get the valves to close off without causing an explosion of pipes otherwise. But some coordinated effort because we do live in a fragile environment. And this could happen tomorrow somewhere. I don't know if it could happen as bad as it is, Paul, because really walking the street on Sunday, I just felt, gosh, you could have planned a better disaster with the mouth of the garage right at the base of the valley. I mean, it was just like right there. It was just really as if an engineer from SC did it in revenge for that 1969 when you beat them back there. So, and it is great that no one got hurt, you know, and everybody worked as a team. I was very proud of everybody that was working out on that. I do want to have a motion with the CLA that I do thought it was very wrong that there was a phony baloney PIO on the radio, on television with KABC, I believe, that used a foul analogy. And I think in these times of emergency, it should be a violation of the law that somebody identifies themselves as a PIO and then gives false information. Because we will have an earthquake, and there may be somebody who will try to jump information that is incorrect. So if you could look at that and draft that up for me, I know my colleagues would probably want to second that, because the PIO is a name, but if you're representing, like if I represent a police officer, I'm not a police officer, that's a violation of the law. The same should be for PIOs, especially in our city right there. And you did discuss the issue of the view cameras as different with sanitation. and looking at that issue. And I do remember when we had the series of breaks some years ago, most of the pipes in the central city, which were older pipes, did not break, but there was a rash west of Western. Somebody dated it to a period of time when the city was under development, when the steels had more contents that were stronger than when that period was due to the war effort or whatever it was. I mean, it was really yes and no. And the older parts of the city had the oldest pipes, but they didn't break. And so I think there's some information that's there. Look at the earthquakes. Look at the Sylmar Tunnel, because the Sylmar Tunnel was your tunnel. Was that right in '72 when they had the explosion? '71, not the earthquake. The tunnel. There was a tunnel that
Lap 72.
That was Metropolitan.
Metropolitan Water. But look at it too. Water's water, tunnels are tunnels. I think that's a team there, because I think Metropolitan had a break on Sunset Boulevard right by the House of Blues, and they became a real House of Blues.
Yes.
For that damage that was done there. Informing the public is so important, and I think it was very good. And I mentioned the thing about having the ambassadors, because everybody wants to be an expert now on television, and they should be, because there's so much information as knowledge is power. So let's give it to them, Joe. Tell them and bring them down and show them and send them up the Owens Valley. Have them walk Jawbone. Have them walk Jawbone, Marty. So that would be good. Other than that, I think we have to look at this on a case-by-case basis. And also, Mr. CLA, if you could, I put a motion in long ago, but it was a different group. Maybe this group will support it. We have our budgets in April and a budget day, and we go through the whole budget. In October, which is 6 months from our budget process, we should have infrastructure day to really look back at our infrastructure and what it's doing. I mean, Coldwater is going all the way north. That's a long way, and you got to go slow and safe. They had a total commitment that did this in 48 plus hours to do this on Sunset Boulevard. Total commitment, which we couldn't afford in the future, but we have to plan and map it all out. So I made my points, Mr. Chair. I just think we should ask that we have in council an infrastructure in October that, and I'll find out what that motion is, Mr. CLA, and then it gives us a chance to sit back and look. The thing I understand about Los Angeles World Airports is and the same could be with Ms. Edwards as you guide the ship called the DWP, is that Gina Marie Lindsay looks at the long-range vision of the airport operations, but she has a lieutenant who's right below her who does daily operations. Here's your lieutenants right there. You got to look at the vision and keep us informed and what we have to do in the future so that we get things done and tell people about it. We got to inform people. And people do not know where the water comes from or how it gets there, but I think we really got to have a great public information campaign. You have Public Power Week still, don't you? Is there anybody from Power Side in here? Yeah, you still have Public Power? Have Public Water Week, but call it City Water. That sounds more interesting. City Water Week. Well, maybe not. You figure it out.
Mr. Koretz, would you like to ask any additional questions or have any additional comments?
I just have one additional question on the claims. I think since we have pretty obvious responsibility for it, are we seeking to avoid too much legal involvement and just coordinating with people to settle claims as opposed to having attorneys on both sides fighting it out?
We have nothing along those lines at present, sir, and we are monitoring it literally daily to ensure if anything becomes more complex than normal, we'll do our best to simplify it.
As I know in some cases, like the Metro disaster a while back, the collapse, they were able to save a lot of money by basically agreeing to one attorney or a retired judge or some such individual that could help adjudicate everything on both sides, since it wasn't a contentious circumstance.
The advantage with the vehicles is, by and large, we're dealing with insurance companies who do this for a living. And I've spoken repeatedly with the chancellor at UCLA, and I have told him to call me directly if there's any information that he needs or if he feels that we're not being immediately responsive. So I will keep track of that job.
Very good. Thank you.
Colleagues, anything else? Very good. Well, I didn't say it at the beginning, but I will say it in the close. I am absolutely proud and happy in the response the city of Los Angeles had to this issue, and I'm equally excited about asking you all to come back to this committee to report in 30 days on options for long-term, practical, and cost-effective water system infrastructure improvement program recommendations. I think Mr. Blumenfield alluded to the fact that it's not going to come without any expense, but we really do need to focus on how it is that we're going to cue the order of these improvements.
Right.
And there is a lot for us to build from. 5 years ago, Mr. Labange alluded to the fact that there was a rash of water breaks throughout the system, and as a result, the council then and your department had something called the Expert Review of Water System Pipeline Breaks in the city, and I'm sure that will help inform the conversation that we'll have here in 30 days. So, Jim, Marty, you all have been tremendous, and Ms. Edwards, God bless you. You've been on the job how long now?
Seems like forever. So.
We haven't broken 6 months, Ms. Edwards, have we? And it's just fun. But what you all have done in response is tremendous. What we're going to have to do, colleagues, moving forward is going to also have to be tremendous as well. So thank you very much. And the last thing that I will say is that the Bruin community deserves a little bit of acknowledgement here. We had students come to the aid of some of those important artifacts at Poly Pavilion. We have a tremendous partner in Chancellor Block and everybody on the community team there. And we owe them an apology, which you all have done, and we are partnering with them, and they're going to have to pardon our dust a little bit longer as we figure out how to get the Fighting Bruins, the mighty Bruins of Westwood, back to whole. So with that, we will go ahead and see this come back in 30 days, and we will move on to item number 2.
Certainly. Item number 2. DWP CAO reports an ordinance relative to proposed power purchase agreement with RE Barron Ridge 1 LLC for solar capacity purchase options and related matters. We have staff from DWP and the CAO.
Very good. Colleagues, I don't know if you've all had a chance to review this. In the interest of time, it's a very complicated situation. I'd ask the department and the CAO to give us sort of a very succinct briefing on this. It's a very important project for the utility. It's incredibly important for us as we move towards our renewable portfolio standard goals, and I think we figured out a way to make this work. So with that, please give us your presentation on this project, please.
My name is Mike Webster. I'm Assistant Director of our Power System Planning and Development, and I will be extremely brief, and I can go into more detail, but this is a very strategic project for our renewables goals. It is a 60-megawatt solar photovoltaic project. It is the best price project that we have to date, and it meets some very strategic objectives. We went through a very extensive evaluation process, a very extensive financial evaluation, and quite frankly, one of the most significant negotiations we've had to date to get the best fit and the best value for the citizens of Los Angeles. And the reason this is such an important project, if you look at the map right here, is that this is our Barron Ridge Station, which is actually built and brings in the wind energy from our Pine Tree Wind Farm and our Pine Tree Solar. And we just awarded this Beacon property right here. The Barron Ridge project is 2 miles away and fits right into this station. And so it's in our efforts to get a renewable zone of projects in one area so we can own it, operate it, and make maximum use of our existing transmission is critically important for us moving forward. So staff does recommend moving forward with this project as our best price project to date.
Thank you for bringing that forward. You know, I had the opportunity during the recess to go out to Barron Ridge, Beacon, tour the Pine Tree locations, and I think that really helps us understand how those assets are going to deliver for the ratepayers in Los Angeles. I know the CAO raised some concerns with the proposal. Would like to hear those, but also help us understand how it is that we are going to safeguard this particular project with the alternative. I know that there was a recommendation to pursue that, so help us understand a little bit about what the concerns are.
Yes, Bill Koenig, CAO's office. We have reviewed this package. There have been numerous modifications to it, and we have reviewed each one of them. We recommend in favor of this proposal. We think it's a good idea. There are a few components that we have some concerns about, and I'll catch them as suggestions. The first being the project has a provision for the department to exercise an option to purchase this facility 4 times during its life. During that time frame, we have the provision provides for a minimum and maximum purchase should the department choose to elect to purchase that. We have some concerns with that. You're forecasting numbers way far in the future. So to encourage more accurate numbers, we have suggested that instead of utilizing the minimum and maximum that currently exist, that obviously an appraisal would in fact be conducted of this, which the department understands. But to ensure that the entire city is familiar with this, both the mayor and council, we have suggested that an ordinance process be utilized at the time the department makes a decision that they should elect to choose this. At the present time, the ordinance would require both the mayor and council's involvement of this. We think that is a very good guarantee for both the mayor and council to be aware down the road of what the cost of this is going to be and what the needs might be at the time. There are a series of other suggestions that we have incorporated. We have discussed this with the department, and they are in full agreement with this.
Very good. Colleagues?
Get the ratepayer advocate?
Sure. We have the ratepayer. Dr. Pickle, if you wouldn't mind coming on up. I think Mr. Blumenfield had some questions.
Really just wanted to get your perspective on this as well.
We've looked at the bids received at this time. We haven't seen the actual bid documents, but we've received summaries. We agree it is the best priced alternative at this point in time. Not in this case where the contract's already negotiated, but in future contracts, we'd like to reduce the number of buyout options because we believe they do cost something, and we would like to simplify them in the future. But not in this case. That shouldn't hold up this particular contract.
Thank you.
Mr. Koretz.
Yes, I know the report said on December 11th of last year that DWP has no involvement in any current fracking operations. Is that still the case?
Mr. Koretz, we are talking about the Barron Ridge Power Purchase Agreement, which would help us get to our 2020 goals on the renewable portfolio standard. So that would be the item after this.
Oh, I'm sorry. So this is not on.
This is good. This is solar. This is energy. This
is
good.
Solar pack.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong item.
But the Martians up in the sky, they were upset about this. So
Yeah.
Never mind.
Very good. So what I'd like to do is, colleagues, is recommend approval of the proposed power purchase agreement on this Barron Ridge project and the associated purchase option, land purchase option, understanding that we will work in the future to try to minimize the impact on cost, because I think the ratepayer advocate appropriately is helping us understand where we can save some money, and approve the license agreement as specified subject to Charter Section 607, and request that the utility improve its process for reviewing, assessing energy development project proposals in order to ensure the most cost-effective agreements, and would like to preserve the recommendation of making sure that if and when we exercise that option, that it comes back as a matter of ordinance for the council so that we can have the mayor and the council's input at the appropriate time. Without objection, that will be the order. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, there is one card on this. Jen Ritchie with Recurrent Energy.
I'm here to answer any questions on behalf of the public developer.
Well done, Ms. Ritchie. The item is approved. It's moved unanimously, and that
should
should
it be
the order.
forthwith the council? Because I think this is good. Let's get it going.
For council on Friday.
Friday, good job.
Right. And as a matter of fact, it's important to note that we were able to negotiate a better deal by expediting the process. So we have a placeholder on Friday, and we are maximizing our
Do
dollar.
we need 12 votes on Friday?
We need 10, it's my belief.
10, good, okay. 12 votes, okay, because
What,
everybody...
is it 12?
Would be nice.
All right, let's try to
Well,
get...
The more the better.
But just because there is a 12-member issue, I think I'm acting, and so I would just say, in the beginning of the day, members will be there. If we could have in the first part of the meeting, have the clerk, Mr. Clerk, be ready for the first part.
We'll take a look at it.
Thank you.
I think I shouldn't say requirement, but the ability for us to exercise acceptance, I think, is going to be plenty to suffice those folks that are involved in the requirement. So I think we'll be in good place. Now, Mr. Koretz, we are going to go to DWP and natural gas extraction as a result of Mr. Blumenfield's motion. This is item number 3. I'm sorry, Mr. CLA, I've read the item.
Good afternoon, Randy Howard. I'm the Senior Assistant General Manager of the Power System. The department responded to the motion back in December of 2013, provided details regarding our operations on the natural gas field. To give this committee a little bit of background, or quickly give some background, it was actually the previous chair sometime back in around 2004, Council Member Cardenas at the time, who gave encouragement to the department to consider looking at options to hedging our natural gas, including going out and pursuing some physical asset purchases of gas in the ground. And so we did pursue through a lengthy process to look for gas fields and ended up with other Southern California utilities procuring a partial ownership in a gas field in Wyoming. We have long-term rights on a pipeline to bring that gas into the city. So that's kind of the history of how we got to the place. It currently provides about 13% on an annual basis of our natural gas needs for the city. During the peak times, maybe as high as 25% of our gas needs. So it's a very important asset. The stability of both the price and supply are some of the reasons we're able to be as aggressive as we are in some of our renewable activities, because it really does provide us some stability, and we're not seeing the volatility in the natural gas market as a result. Related to fracking, we currently are not drilling on the property. We've drilled a lot of wells historically with the other partners in the project. The operations are handled by one of the owners, and so they manage all of the drilling activities. The wells that are in place are we plan on them providing gas supply for at least 20 to 25 years going forward, and no additional fracking should take place. I will also say that in the state of Wyoming, the Oil and Gas Commission manages all of the permitting and the monitoring of all the fracking and drilling activity, and they have a very solid policy in place. We report, or the driller reports on all of the fracking fluids that are used. They do monitoring. The utilities that are involved in the development of those fields contribute towards those funds to keep the monitoring going. In the field that the city is a participant in, there has been no record of any contamination. These wells are 14,000 feet deep, and that's where the fracking is occurring, well below any of the water table activity that is going on. And so there has been, at least in this area, no record whatsoever of any problems. And at this time, I would take any questions you might have.
Mr. Blumenfield.
And thank you, Mr. Fuentes, for bringing this forward. The whole reason for this, obviously, we don't want to be hypocritical in terms of we're taking a stance against fracking, and then if we're taking advantage of that in Wyoming, but you're saying that we're not, that presents a problem and potentially a liability too, right? And that's what I first wanted to get the sense of: are we not? Which I'm hearing you're saying we're not. But if we were to, would that be a liability for us? And is that something that we factor in?
So if we were currently fracking?
Well, we're currently not fracking because you say we're not drilling any wells at all.
That is correct.
We're getting 13% of our gas from there, but it's from existing wells, and we have no plans to create any additional drilling for the next 25 years. Is that what I'm hearing, or I don't want to mischaracterize what you said?
Yeah. So there are no current plans to do any drilling. It doesn't mean in the future that plans won't be brought forward by any one of the participants that's a joint owner. The city's ownership share is about a third of the particular acreage that we're involved in. So we are one participant, and other participants can bring forward drilling activities. The city could choose not to participate in that drilling, but the drilling would still proceed. We have no ability to stop that drilling from proceeding.
Because we're a minority owner, so to speak.
Because of the ownership agreement and the operational agreement.
Would that give us any liability there's all these allegations in Wyoming, at least, that the fracking is impacting the water supply, albeit you're telling me it's below, but that's the big controversy over there. So if something were to get into the water supply, would that us, even as a minority shareholder, so to speak, would that give us any liability?
Well, I would assume to any degree that the department's actions or the actions of an asset that we're a partial owner in contributes to any contamination, that we're going to be responsible to clean it up. I don't think we're going to excuse ourselves from any liability if we're a responsible party.
Well, that's an issue I think we need to think about and is of some concern.
I think is one of the potential concerns. Again, I think we do a good job of monitoring. If you were to look at the information we provided the data sheets regarding the fracking fluids that are used. 96% of those are just water and sand. That's the bulk up there. It's the formation of how they do the fracking operation. And again, we have not seen any issues whatsoever with contamination. There is a concern going on in a particular part of Wyoming, and there are studies and investigations. We expect to see a report out in September regarding that. We'll certainly be monitoring and looking at that, but it's not associated with the city's assets or properties in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you.
Mr. Koretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the same concerns that were expressed by Mr. Blumenfield. And I'm wondering if we consider these things in our cost assessments, whether there may be externalities like the cost and liability for possible water contamination or methane leaks, which obviously we know have a much greater impact on climate change than carbon dioxide. Have we calculated those possible risks into the cost comparisons between this and other sources of energy?
Councilman, I believe the department did look at all of the potential risk and benefits associated with its acquisition at the time that it brought forward to its board and the full council in the acquisition. I think those would be considerations given in any natural gas acquisition we would make, whether it's just a purchase of the gas supply itself or the acquisition of a field. There are risk assessments made. There are insurance carriers that are covering insurance related to those risks. Obviously, it's first and foremost for us to ensure that the operation is a good operation and we don't contaminate any groundwater supply. That's our first and foremost desire.
And is it less expensive to use natural gas that is achieved by fracking than non-fracking, or is it required to use fracking in all natural gas exploration?
In these particular fields, the fracking is a requirement. They're very tight sands and they're small pockets, and so in order to access that gas, fracking is a necessary endeavor to extract the gas out.
But it wouldn't have cost us any more to find natural gas in other places where fracking wasn't used.
And we looked in many other locations, evaluated a lot of different properties, and the decision was to hedge part of the city's natural gas portfolio, and this appeared to be the most cost-effective asset that we could find at the time.
How do the numbers compare to less environmentally intrusive sources like solar and wind, which I know are becoming less expensive. How do they compare in terms of the cost?
Well, I think as you're aware, solar and wind aren't really dispatchable assets, so it's not a simple comparison because the natural gas is the fuel supply for something that is dispatchable that you can turn on and off as you need to meet the requirements. I think as we continue to evolve our renewable portfolio and we continue to explore the use of storage in combination, I think we're going to continue to minimize as much as we can our natural gas supply in that process. But natural gas is the backup fuel that we're considering as we walk forward with our replacement of our coal resources.
And I know there's obviously a lot of concerns about fracking in Wyoming. One of them across the country has been earthquakes. Do we know if fracking has impacted earthquakes in Wyoming?
We are not aware of any earthquake issues related to at least the field the city is involved in.
And what are we seeing in terms of development of new technologies that, as we get off coal, might allow us to avoid getting too involved in natural gas and move on to less environmentally harmful technologies?
I think our team is looking aggressively at additional geothermal resources, which are a direct replacement for some of the coal resources that run around the clock. The capacity factor of a typical geothermal facility is in the 95 to 98%, and you've seen a couple of those recent packages come through this committee, and we continue to pursue that as well as pursue some geothermal development on land that the city purchased down in the Salton Sea area. We hope the exploration of the fields down there will be fruitful for the city, and we can proceed there. The other is really looking at the storage technologies that then could take some of those intermittent resources, store them, and then make them available when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing.
How close are we to that actually proving to be practical? Are we there? Are we a few years away?
I think we're still a few years away on the commercial level that we would need for a city this size, but we are seeing great strides in the automotive sector. So a lot of the transportation sectors, you're seeing more of the EVs. The battery technology continues to evolve each year, and it's quite exciting as to what the capabilities are of some of the new battery technology.
Very good. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. We've got two speaker cards, Alexandra Nagy and Connor Everts.
Good afternoon. My name is Alex Nagy, and I'm the Southern California organizer with Food and Water Watch. I just wanted to thank everyone for bringing this motion forward. Some really great questions. I had a couple questions myself. What are the aquifers near this site, and then how large is the site itself, and how long has it been in operation? Because depending on if there's groundwater possibilities for contamination, the well casing failure rate of any well immediately is 6%, so the casing that prevents gas or pollutants from migrating into groundwater sources fails at a 6% rate immediately, and over 15 years, 50%. And so that's just a question when it comes to the liability. And then I just wanted to talk about, in terms of natural gas being a solution, trying to bring us off of coal and other fossil fuels that are going to impact our climate. There have been a lot of recent studies that have come out basically saying that, we know methane is 70 to 100 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than the CO2 in coal. And when we're doing fracking, whether or not it's happening at this facility or not, but we are using natural gas, it's coming from somewhere, fracking, that this will have an actual, a greater impact on climate and carbon emissions, more so than coal. So it's actually come out that fracking for natural gas is actually dirtier than coal. So just thought those should be some things that you're aware of. And then in Pavilion, Wyoming, which was the big case where the EPA actually found that groundwater had been contaminated from fracking, there was a lot of top-down pressure to pull the EPA out of that studies, and then the state handed it over to Encana, which was the company accused of contaminating the groundwater. So there's a lot of interesting politics happening in Wyoming, and I just wanted to thank you for bringing this forward.
Connor Everett, Southern California Watershed. I wanted to thank the chair and the makers of the motion for this discussion so we understand not only where our energy and water end up, but the impacts on where it comes from. And I want to thank you for the earlier infrastructure discussion and hope that's continuing. Thank you very much.
Very good. We're going to go ahead and note and file the item. Item number 5.
Certainly, item number 5. DWP and CAO reports relative to proposed amendment number 1, contract with Staples Contract and Commercial Incorporated. We have staff from both DWP and the CAO's office.
Mr. Koretz, you had a question?
Let's see.
These are amendments to the existing agreement with Staples Contract and Commercial for paper printer forms for a 1-year options and expenditure limit as specified.
Yes, I just had a question about whether we might be able to use more recycled paper than we do now, and whether we couldn't find a technology that enabled us to do that.
So Randy Howard, Senior Assistant General Manager of the Power System, and I'll just touch on that. So it was an attempt to find a paper that had a larger recycled content. This paper is used with very high-speed printing machines related to the billing system, and so there was a lot of testing that took place regarding the type of paper that could withstand the pressures of the high speed, as well as issues regarding the ink and the smearing of ink if there was moisture. And so one of the concerns with our billing is we have mail carriers take the mail out, and sometimes it gets a little wet or moist, and certain papers, the ink will smear. And so in the testing, it appeared that this was the best paper to utilize for that purpose, but we'll continue to look going forward for better paper products that could do this, that have a higher level of recycled content. I'd also like to add that it is a significant goal of ours to continue to move customers away from paperless, and we'll probably be coming back with seeking your help on some processes in which we think we want to try to do that, because more and more customers are becoming comfortable not receiving a paper bill, and we think there's a lot more we can do there.
Well, until we go paperless, is there a way for us to take a look at what other utilities are doing? I don't know what Southern California Edison and others that do similar billing, whether they've found a way to go to a higher recycled content.
And maybe.
Yeah, Matt Lamp, the CIO for DWP. We really were one of the first to go to this level of high-speed, full-color printing to make our bill more understandable using different colors, etc. We get visits 2-3 times a year from other utilities around the country to take a look at our processes. We have not found anybody who is doing that level of printing who has been able to use a recycled paper. It tends not to be consistent enough in terms of strength, in terms of its ability to both resist bursting when it's running through the high-speed printers and burst appropriately when it's going into the mail sorters, etc. So that's, at this point, they just haven't been able to do it. I think it took us about 8 months of working with the paper manufacturer to get the sort of chemistry balance of this paper right to be able to meet all those requirements that Randy identified. And just comment, the smearing piece is not just about it being readable for the person who gets it. They have to tear off a tab that has to come back with a fine barcode. That barcode goes through a high-speed process to match up the check with the account. And if there's any smearing of that, then all those have to be pulled and handled manually. So that ability to resist that is an extremely important piece of the whole process that we've gone through.
And we don't have the ability.
We'll continue to look, but I'm not terribly optimistic at this point.
We don't have the ability to use other equipment. We've purchased this equipment.
We own this equipment. This contract is really intended to go, the options take us through the expected life of that equipment. We have extended our maintenance, our ink, et cetera, through that period, and this essentially brings the paper up to the same length of contract that we've already done for maintenance and ink.
And so part of the purpose as well with this very high speed and this paper contract is we're continuing to look to move forward in monthly billing for our residential sector. And so we're going to be doubling up on some of our billing activities related to the residential sector, and part of this was putting all of those pieces together to do so.
So going from the 2-month billing cycle to a 1-month billing cycle.
That's our objective.
You obviously have twice as much paper you have to deal with.
Unless we can get people to go with a paperless bill.
It's not quite twice as much because commercial's already on a
That's
monthly.
true.
So we figure it's about 65% increase in.
So presumably we'll keep looking for a paper that works, and
we will.
At the same time, I think it's a great idea to do a big education campaign to get a lot of people off the paper billing. I think that'll save us a lot of money in environmental hazards, et cetera, et cetera.
Very good. With that objection, the order will be to approve the proposed amendment number 1 to the existing agreement with Staples Contract and Commercial Incorporated for paper printer forms for 4 one-year options and the expenditure limit as specified. Very good. Mr. Clerk, Mr. CLA, there are no general public comment cards?
Nope.
I believe that brings us to a close. Thank you.